Brian Wilmer from the Low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you. It's another one of our conference preview podcasts. It is the Big South today. We've got to get you guys a conference preview podcast for every one of these conferences, and we're pretty much going in alphabetical order with regards to the mid-majors. We're going to be joined in segment number 2 by Brian Wilmer. He does a tremendous job over at Daily Dose of Hoops. I know that he's been doing a tremendous job covering the southeast part of the country in general. Does a little bit of work on the college football side of things as well. He's right now working on the Blue Ribbon Yearbook preview of the Big South as well. We're going to be chatting with him about all 9 teams in the conference. We're going to be chatting with him about some of the ups and downs, the coaching changes, what have you. So we're going to have a great chat there. And then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector or finish for the Big South. And here in segment number 1, we're going to be taking a look at the styles and betting trends of the Big South. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM. They mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Well, I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, and if I were to get any in with these conference previews, I always like to keep them clean. So if you ever do fire in a Twitter/X question and I'm doing a conference preview, I will shore that up the next day. But everything, it is powered by EdgeBoost. Over at EdgeBoost, they're making sure that bettors are able to access their funds whenever and wherever with whatever capacity they need to. As EdgeBoost, they are set up to be able to get you cashback rewards. It's the first ever account that is set up for bettors, and when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That'll get you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's get down to business and let's take a look at a Big South where we had a few teams last season that, well, let's call it what it is. They were a little bit less than savory on defense. Headlined by the fact that USC Upstate was 351st in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So, yeah, that was a little bit less than tremendous for them. Charleston Southern, they were ranking 317th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. UNC Asheville, 315th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Gardner-Webb was 300th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So, 4 teams in the conference finished in the bottom 65 in all of college basketball. High Point was certainly not a low point. They were able to do a rock solid job with their defense, and Longwood has been good on the glass over the last few seasons as well. Longwood's defense did slip up a little bit last year, though. They were down to about 244th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. High Point right around about 156. So, all sorts of rough with regards to this sort of unit in general. And Radford is going to be very much a new look team. They bring in Zach Chu from the NBA ranks, but even them last year, 272nd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And it wasn't as if this was like some sort of amazing three-point shooting expose in the conference or anything like that. You had a few teams that were able to get a little bit warm from three-point. UNC Asheville always does a pretty rock-solid job with regards to their three-point shooting, as for UNC Asheville last season, they were clocking in more in that neighborhood about 157th with regards to their three-point shooting percentage. Winthrop is always a little bit of a hot and cold sort of shooting team, 183rd in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. Longwood had a terrible start to the season last year with their three-point shooting. They finished up right around about 220th, and you did see High Point bury some threes. They were 45th in all of college basketball, but as we know, Alan Huss, he's now going to be out of the fold, so they turn things over to Mr. Armstrong, who comes on over from Baylor. So I'm very curious to see what is going to be happening on that front. Even Radford was able to give you a little bit of pop from three-point range, but it wasn't amazing. Presbyterian, by the way, 65th in the country in terms of three-point shooting percentage. They were solid. Radford was more around about 78, so you have some up, down, all-around sort of teams, but a lot of this was just due to the fact that these teams got gashed down low, and there was a lot of free throw shooting in this conference as well. That was highlighted by the fact that you had a Winthrop do a really good job of just being able to get to the free throw line, because these teams aren't necessarily so amazing with regards to their three-point shooting. They like to drive the ball inside. Winthrop was number 1 in the country in terms of percentage of their field goals that yielded a free throw. Longwood was number 3 in this category. Charleston Southern, they were number 7 in this category. So you had a whole bunch of teams that were marching the free throw line. Heck, Radford was number 20 in all of college basketball, and that means that you get points with the clock stopped. This is a conference in which the whistle blows quite a bit. So if you're looking at like the SEC refs calling a lot of fouls, look no further than the Big South, because you had a lot of that as well. And that is very intriguing with regards to a totals perspective as well, because these teams like to foul a lot. They like to be able to get to the free throw line, and Winthrop was outside the top 300 in terms of their free throw shooting percentage. So that was a little bit costly to them. But if you look at the over and under rate out there in the Big South, only two teams had more unders than overs. High Point, 18 unders to 15 overs. Presbyterian, 17 unders to 13 overs. Meanwhile, Longwood was 18 overs to 11 unders. Gardner-Webb, 18 overs, 12 unders and a push. USC Upstate, 17 overs to 12 unders. Winthrop, 18 overs to 13 unders. Radford, 17 overs, 14 unders. And then you had Charleston Southern, 15, 15, and 1. UNC Asheville, 14 overs, 12 unders, and 2 pushes along the way as well. And if you take a look at non-conference versus conference games, I think that that's a little bit telling as well, because when you got things in the conference, things came down a little bit more, as you did have 4 teams within the conference have more unders than overs. That would be Presbyterian, High Point, Gardner-Webb, and Charleston Southern. Charleston Southern being your best under team, 10 unders, 6 overs, and a push. Meanwhile, you had 4 teams that had more overs than unders, and you had 1 team in UNC Asheville go 9 overs to 9 unders. So when things got to conference play, things were a little bit more tame, but in the non-conference games, that's where things were all sorts of harebrained and crazy. Presbyterian was the only team outside the conference that played more unders than overs, 8 unders to 5 overs, while Gardner-Webb, 11 overs to 2 unders. They had a coaching regime change last offseason. That caused their defense to go straight down the toilet bowl, and you had 4 different teams in this conference play at least 62.5% of their non-conference games to the under, and that was not necessarily too much the friend of the Big South in terms of getting you to the window and being able to yield you a lot of profit, as you did have quite a few teams that were a little bit, shall we say, hit or miss against the spread. Charleston Southern was 15 and 16 against the spread. Gardner-Webb 14 and 17 against the spread. UNC Upstate, Longwood, they both went 12 and 17 against the spread. Your best against the spread team was Radford, 18, 12, and 1 against the spread. Winthrop was 17 and 14. So I mean, these teams weren't necessarily making a ton of money. They weren't necessarily losing you a ton of money either. And if you look at the non-conference portion of things, you only had 2 teams below 500, but you had 3 teams right at 500, and then Gardner-Webb 7 and 6 against the spread outside the conference, along Presbyterian. Radford was 8 and 4 against the spread in terms of non-conference play as well. So very much hit or miss there. And what I found with regards to these teams out there in the Big South is the travel is not necessarily too brutal. These teams were actually relatively solid on the road. Only 2 teams had a against the spread record below 500 away from home. Longwood was 5 and 7 against the spread away from home. UNC Asheville, they were 7 and 8 against the spread away from home. Not that you had any team that was really lighting the world on fire. Or best against the spread team away from home was Winthrop, 8 and 5 against the spread. Presbyterian 9 and 7 against the spread away from home. Radford 8, 7 and 1 against the spread away from home. And then Gardner-Webb, High Point, and USC Upstate all were 500 against the spread away from home. Charleston Southern 9 and 8. So I mean, it's a very interesting conference, one that seemed very fairly priced by bookmakers. So we'll see if it's going to be able to yield some fruit here in this upcoming season. And we've got ourselves some coaching moves that have happened in the offseason. Lots of guys have moved around in the transfer portal and so much more. And we're going to talk to Brian Wilmer about it next. He does such a great job being able to break down the Big South. We're going to take a look at all 9 teams with him right here on the flip side. I'm Coach Seeps with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Beats and Family Podcast, the Big South Conference Preview Edition. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Seats with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Great to be joined by this man, as he joined me for the Big South preview last year, and he's back once again. It's Brian Wilmer. He's doing a tremendous job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. He's a little bit of everywhere. He's doing some great work over at Blue Ribbon Yearbook, which I know they are tirelessly trying to be able to get everything all set for the upcoming college basketball season. He's also at Daily Dose of Hoops with our good friend Jaden Daly. I know that he does a tremendous job over there. And on top of that, I saw him doing some college football work over at FBS Schedules as well. You're able to follow Brian on Twitter/X at Sports Matters altogether. And Brian, it's great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
It is a pleasure, Brian, and it's going to be a really interesting year out there in the Big South, because last year we saw High Point be the high point of this conference. They were able to make the NCAA tournament, but as we know, a little bit of a coaching regime change in the offseason, and I'll tell you, I'm very impressed by the transfer portal wall that this team has. They bring back a few ancillary pieces from that team from a season ago, but take me through what you're looking at with High Point, a team that is going to be very much a new look from what they were a season ago.
I think the main thing, they are going to be new look, but the biggest look will be the same in Flynn Clayman. Flynn is a different type of coach, but very much in the same mindset as Alan Huss was. And for those who watched High Point last year, you saw a combination of things. You saw a lot of great accumulated talent. I mean, Adlai Thiam came off the bench for them and played limited minutes. That's a guy that would have started anywhere else in the Big South. Bobby Pettiford on that team. Demarion Williams, who's a Texas Tech transfer on that team. Just so much talent around. Keza Jiffa, Jocelyn Bodo, Kimani Hamilton, all these names that you can come up with for the talent they had. But there were a couple of things that were key, and they will not change with Flynn. First of all, with all that talent around, they have a little bit of a mathematical focus. They're a very analytical team. Coach Huss talked a lot about the improvement in the league in KenPom. Flynn will continue a lot of that. And then you also see an element of togetherness with that team. Even with all those big stars on that team last year, they all bought in. They all sacrificed for the betterment of the team. And there were so many stories that Alan told me last year of just guys really understanding not just their role, but the roles of others and celebrating the success of others. And I'm sure Flynn will continue that even with the new names on that team.
Yep, absolutely. I do think that with High Point bringing in the talent that they are going to be rock solid, and many places have them projected towards the top of the Big South. This team is also projected to be towards the top of the Big South as well, and this is a team that's really intriguing because they bring in Zach Chu. He was a part of the Indiana Pacers staff a few seasons ago, and we saw what the Indiana Pacers were able to do a few weeks ago, but I mean, it's a Radford team that is obviously going to be very new look, but bringing in someone like a Brandon Rigsby, who saw some minutes over at Oregon along with Minnesota's big. Del Jones is a guy that's able to be rock solid in the backcourt. Jalen Johnson, we saw him be a double-figure scorer last year over in the Ohio Valley Conference. Obviously, it's going to be a question of how these guys mesh together, but I see a lot of talent here for Radford.
Absolutely, and Jalen Johnson is one of the first names that comes up when you talk about impact transfers in this league, a guy who has so much experience, a guy who can play point. He's played elsewhere on the floor, but one of the things about Zach Chu's team that you'll notice is that there's a lot of movement without the ball. There's a lot of positionless basketball, and that's kind of become a trend around college basketball, but definitely with this team. It's a team that's going to look to do things 1 through 5 on both offense and defense. They're not going to be the traditional Radford teams that you may have seen before. The point guard from last year, Truth Harris, followed Darius Nichols to LaSalle along with a few other players. So they will be new look, not just in really the coaching scheme of things, but also the product you see on the floor. They're going to look to play very quickly. They have a lot of guys who are very athletic, very talented, and guys who can really create matchup issues all over the floor. Another name that's a big one, Louis Jordan, who transferred from UMBC, is another guy who can shoot really well from 3, and that's a guy who at 6'9" is going to create matchup problems for everybody in this league.
Yep, that is absolutely a good point there. And I do think that with this Radford team, they're going to be able to do a solid job down low as they brought in a few big men via the transfer portal, and that's very big in this conference. As joining me on the show, we do have Mr. Brian Wilmer. He does a tremendous job over at Daily Dose of Hoops, Blue Ribbon Yearbook, and so much more joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think that this team is also going to be very intriguing for this upcoming season as it's Longwood. Longwood has been one of those teams that has been towards the top of the conference. They've busted through to be able to make a few NCAA tournaments. It's going to be a new look for them, but Jacoy Hutchinson, who comes on over from George Washington, he's a guy that I think is intriguing. KJ McClurg, it felt like he was a little bit up and down last season, but he and Elijah Tucker being back for this team, I think that it's big to have a little bit of, shall we say, consistency. And then Alfonso Billups, I recognize he didn't do a ton over at VCU, but I'm very excited to see what he's able to do. And this team, even though they don't have a ton of size, they're a team that I think is going to be very much built around a rock-solid backcourt.
Absolutely, and this is a team that you can trust under Ronnie Thomas will be effort-based. He is a coach who, taking over for Griff Aldrich, has learned at Griff's side, and also just a rising star in the coaching business, aside from being with Griff, a coach who thrives on consistency, who thrives on toughness, who thrives on being smart on the court. You'll see them play defense with intensity on every possession. You will see them do smart things on the floor. And even with their being a little bit undersized, they were undersized last year, too, after Shimon Zapala had transferred out. But that didn't really seem to affect the Lancers in a lot of cases. There were some times where against, Bodo or an elite post player, they struggled. But in this league, the size won't be as much of a difference as just kind of the overall mentality. And that team will fight on every possession. They will fight in every game, and they will be in a lot of games in this league. And a lot of people, when you start looking at rising stars, Ronnie Thomas is one of them. So keep an eye on the Lancers.
Yep, I do think so as well. I really like what I've seen out of Longwood over the last few seasons, and I'm actually liking what I'm seeing out of this team as well. As for Presbyterian, it's been a little bit hit or miss for them over since they lost Justin Kern a few years ago. Like, I mean, getting Presbyterian 20 wins like Kern was able to do, I don't think a lot of people realize the Herculean feat that was, but getting back Jalen Peterson, I think is very big. You've got Carl Parrish back from a year ago. It's a Presbyterian team that you're not going to get like a bunch of guys via the transfer portal or anything like that. So having back Iverson King to be able to take some strides forward, I think is big. And for Presbyterian, out of a lot of the teams in this conference, you're actually noticing some returning minutes. You're noticing some guys that they're back from a season ago. And I think that that's going to serve them very well this season.
Yeah, and speaking of teams that will fight all the time, Presbyterian will fight all the time. If you ever talk to Alan Huss, for instance, about Presbyterian, he will tell you what a challenge they are to play. And he's not the only coach who said that. One of the things that Huss said to me was that they run stuff that was run when I played. And he said they modernized it a bit. So you see a lot of that 90s and 2000s kind of college basketball style that's modernized for today's game. And they do that to maximize the talent they have. You mentioned Jalen Peterson, one of the absolute elite defenders in this league, a guy that just blocks shots coming out of thin air. There was an interesting situation last year with him where he had a technical assessed on him for blocking a shot, and the response was that it was a dangerous play. So when you see Jalen Peterson understand the level of athlete you were getting in that guy, the loss of Corey Mincy at point guard is going to be tough for them to overcome, but they've got some great talent coming in. Eric Taylor, who transferred from Sam Houston State, is an elite scorer in this league, and so many other guys that Quentin Farrell, the Presbyterian coach, just seems to craft. He gets a lot of guys that schools may not necessarily look at first or know what to do with, and he gets them there and turns them into stars. That's been a hallmark of Q's career at Presbyterian.
Yep, that has been a hallmark of his, and I do think that for Presbyterian, the strides are going to continue to be going forward. I've liked what I've seen from them over the last few seasons, and this could be a little bit of breakthrough for them. And then I like the fact that USC Upstate has a lot of guys that are returning. Like Marty Richter had a rough first season over there at USC Upstate, but he wasn't trying for any sort of a quick fix or anything like that. He was looking to do things the right way, losing Brett Harris, losing Mr. Dean, which I still thought was one of the better names in all of college basketball. That was a little bit rough, but you retain Kamani Gregory, a nice double-figure scorer, guy that was able to lead the way with 3.5 assists per contest. That's a very good place to be able to start. With Richter, he brought over a few guys that had ties to him when he was over at Drake. He's been able to retain a few of those guys as well. And I take a look at this USC Upstate team. Certainly, I do think that they're going to get a little bit lambasted on the glass, but I do think that the backcourt has a chance to really be able to ascend this season.
That veteran experience is the one thing that I think ties this team together. And you mentioned Marty Richter. That's a guy who, when I talked to him last year about this job, because one of the things that I always tend to do whenever I talk to new coaches in this league is just to ask them what about this particular role influenced them in their taking that job. And he told me, he's just like, I'm a college basketball lifer. I've coached at the JUCO level. I've coached at lower levels. I know how to build these things. And being a JUCO coach, I'm used to the transfer portal mentality where I get a team or a guy for a year, 2 years, and then they're gone and I have to rebuild again. He actually embraces the same challenge that a lot of people seem to be running from lately, especially at the higher levels. And Marty is a grinder. He's going to fight like crazy. He's going to emphasize fundamentals, which is a key thing for this team. They may not necessarily out-talent everybody, but they will outwork people and they will out-fundamental people. In fact, I can point to one game last year where they had an unfortunate run at the end of the game where Winthrop went on a 25-0 run to end the game, but they were ahead in Rock Hill against a very talented Winthrop team. And just that one run changed the game.
Yep, I actually do remember that game very, very well. That was interesting from the betting standpoint, to say the least, but certainly with USC Upstate, I do agree with you. Being able to bring back Gregory and company, I do like what they're building there, and I do think that with Marty Richter, he's doing it right over there at USC Upstate. As we know, one of the, shall we say, more difficult jobs out there in all of college basketball. And then I take a look at this team, and I think that they might be the biggest wild card in the conference, and it's Winthrop. And the reason why, out of all the guys that come back with any sort of Division I college basketball experience, Kareem Rozier is like the only guy that's below 6'4". Like, you just have size upon size with this team. A guy, Logan Duncombe, who used to be a top 150 recruit, used to play at a power conference level, is intriguing. Dalen Berry, he's going to be coming over, and I do think that he's going to give you a bit of something after he was in the American, he was was over at Charleston Southern, if I'm not mistaken, a year or two ago as well. So he's a guy that's dealt with a few injuries. I think that you're going to be able to get a lot out of him. And I look at this Winthrop team, need to be better at the free throw line. That was rough for them last season, but bringing in a guy like a Kareem Rozier to be able to run the offense, I thought was massive.
Yeah, for Winthrop fans, I think the big thing for them is looking out on the floor and not seeing Kelton Talford there. For those who are Winthrop fans, you've looked out there ever since Pat Kelsey was at Winthrop, and you've seen Kelton Talford in the post. And that's a guy who is just an absolute nightmare to defend. He's now gone. Nick Johnson, Kaysen Harrison, all these great players that Winthrop had who were veterans are now gone. I think the next challenge for them is to craft that next group, as you mentioned. We talked about kind of in-conference transfers, which has not been a common thing in this league. Dalen Berry is one. Pharrell Boyagano from Gardner-Webb is another who's on that Winthrop roster. So that'll be interesting to watch. You look at a guy like Josh Mayo, who was pretty successful at Coastal Carolina coming into this program, and Winthrop plays Coastal Carolina this year, so that'll be interesting to watch. But Mark Prosser and his group always have a way of just connecting guys who may seem to be disconnected or from different backgrounds or whatever. You know, when Nick Johnson and his group came in, there were a lot of questions about, well, these guys came from bigger schools. What can we get out of them? And then last year, they're playing for a title, and they were, again, another run from holding up a trophy in Johnson City. And this is a group I would always look at great coaching in this league because it's all over the place, but there's definitely great coaching in Rock Hill.
Yep, there certainly is. And I do think that Prosser, you mentioned before, has just been so rock solid in this league for so long. You always give him the benefit of the doubt. And I think that this could be one of his best teams yet. As joining me on the show, we do have Brian Wilmer. He does a tremendous job over at Blue Ribbon Yearbook, along Daily Dose of Hoops. Joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. I do think that this one may be a little bit more rough. We've got a Gardner-Webb team that is in year number 2 of a new coaching regime, and they've got quite a bit of size on the roster. I do think that Jacob Hudson in the backcourt is going to be able to give this team a bit of something, one of the main returnees from a season ago, but I do think that with Gardner-Webb, it's just all about finding their footing, and I think that the backcourt is going to be a big question mark for them, along with what they're going to be able to get out of Curtis Williams, who I think has quite a bit of upside as well.
Agreed. And you mentioned Jacob Hudson. The point guard position is going to be the place to watch this year because they lost Buddy Simmons. Buddy Simmons was such a dynamic offensive player and a guy who's now at St. Bonaventure, but a guy who was just a problem for people. And he was an undersized guard. It never mattered. He still got his points. He still got by people. He was so quick, handled the ball so well, and now he's gone. So that's going to be a key thing to watch. They lost some other pieces, but I think looking around at who they added Ace Talbert from St. Francis, which is an interesting pickup, a guy who played on an NCAA team this year and was a key contributor. They picked up DJ Jefferson, who's an in-league transfer from Longwood. And again, you look at Jeremy Luther, and that's a guy who is a lifer, a guy who's been coaching forever. He was really great friends with Tim Kraft, who was at Gardner-Webb and then took over for Tim when Tim went to Western Carolina. He's a guy who is basically Boiling Springs, where Gardner-Webb is located, through and through. His family has roots there. He truly believes in that program and believes in what they're looking to do. There's nobody more invested in this league than Jeremy Luther is at Gardner-Webb. And they did struggle quite a bit last year. I think a lot of it was consistency. They got a lot of improved offensive play in the post. And this year, I'll be curious to see what their big guys can do. You mentioned their size on their roster. It's kind of a flip from last year. Last year, you had the point guard situation settled, and there was some uncertainty in the paint. They settled that. This year, there's a little more certainty in the paint and a little less certainty at the guard position. So that's what I'll be watching from them.
Yep, and you want to talk about a lifer at their school, Son Nimley over at Charleston Southern. I remember about 10, 15 years ago, he was a rock-solid guard for them under what was at the time Barclay Radabaugh, and he's taken over for this program. And now he gets Alan Sumler back, who pretty much missed all of last year due to an injury. Getting him back, I think, is just so massive. And then 7-footer Devin Bradford. Recognize that throughout his career, hasn't necessarily panned out at places like Kansas State, what have you, but getting a 7-footer out there in this conference, I think that that's rock solid. He was over at Siena last season, so I do think that with Charleston Southern, being able to bring in a big man like that, actually, they bring in Bradford squared because they get Nate Bradford as well. That's going to be nice for them down low. And additionally, having someone like Reese Jones who's able to give you 6'10" size, I think that's very interesting for Charleston Southern, and I think that it all depends upon how Sumler comes off of his injury.
Absolutely. And the other thing that will be the storyline for this team is not having Tajay Kelly. We talked about Kelton Talford and what he's meant to Winthrop. Tajay Kelly has meant that and more to Charleston Southern, the reigning Big South Player of the Year, and just a dynamic player at 6'7" who could do pretty much anything on the floor. This year, there's not that certainty to bring that back again. But you look at what he's brought in, what Sa's brought in, there are a lot of guys like him, a lot of guys who are kind of chip on their shoulder type guys, a lot of D2 guys who were stars at D2, and now they get to come up and prove themselves at the D1 level. And whenever you talk to Sa or talk to Quentin Farrell or talk to these league coaches who bring in guys, going all the way back to when Pat Kelsey was at Winthrop and he brought in Jimmy Gavin and Rod Perkins and guys like that who were D2 stars, Keon Moore, who's, an absolute star in Winthrop lore, they're always looking for guys who are willing to bet on themselves. And Sa was a guy who was willing to bet on himself, and, a guy who's not the largest guy in the world. Even if you see him now, he's still out there knocking down buckets before games, but he's still not the biggest guy. But the personality and the belief in himself is definitely there. And you're going to see that with a lot of the guys he's brought in. Luke Williams, a D2 transfer from Maryville. A lot of these names who are D2 stars or guys who came from D1 programs and maybe weren't utilized as much. I'm going to be watching that team because last year we thought that this was going to be their year. It might be that this year is more of their year, and we'll see how those new guys gel together.
Yep, and we were just talking about Charleston Southern, a man that goes from Charleston Southern to UNC Asheville. That'd be DJ Patrick, guy that, once again, he was not healthy last year, so that goes to Charleston Southern, really dealing with a lot of injuries last season. But I think that this Asheville team is very interesting because they bring in a guy, Mitchell Taylor, who he was rock solid over at South Carolina State. It was a South Carolina State team that was towards the top of the MEAC. You've got Aiden Rubio back. He was a nice little bit of a combo player a few seasons ago over at Central Michigan. Just couldn't get out there on the floor last year for UNC Asheville. A lot of guys that have some injury concerns on this roster, but if they're able to get everything to click along with another Taylor and Cameron Taylor, I do think that UNC Asheville, while they might not be back to their NCAA tournament sort of lore, and I am just trying to replace Drew Pember, I know it's been a few years, that's always very, very difficult, but I look at this UNC Asheville team as one that can ascend from a season ago.
Yeah, I start looking at Newcomer of the Year, which is the latest award in the Big South, and it's not lost on me that you could see a Big South player transferring within the schools in the league to become Newcomer of the Year. DJ Patrick might be that guy. And the kind of oddity of transferring from Charleston Southern to Asheville and being Newcomer of the Year is just strange to process. But that's a guy who, had he been able to play for Charleston Southern last year, really would have impacted that team. He will definitely be a key piece for Asheville. And you mentioned Cam Taylor. I have to say, I have a vote in the Freshman of the Year, and that was my Freshman of the Year, even over Mr. Dean. I will say that live now, just because Cam Taylor is such an incredibly athletic guy. Mr. Dean, a better scorer, but Cam Taylor impacts the game in so many ways with the way he defends, just his overall athleticism. He's so quick. He can get off the floor and get over guys, and you don't even realize that it's happened. He's a guy that Mike Morrell loves. Speaking of Mike Morrell, as we circle back to Marty Richter for a second, you talk to Mike Morrell now, and that's a guy who won 4 games in his first year, and now he is as he calls himself, the old man of the league. And you look at Marty Richter having a tough first year, he's certainly got a path to follow in Mike Morrell. But that Asheville team, the one thing about Mike Morrell's teams, you can always trust on them to have athleticism at the point guard position, and more importantly, smarts at the point guard position. Look at the point guards he's had in that program. I mean, even last year, Jordan Marsh, a guy who's since transferred, but a guy who is an elite level point guard despite turning the ball over a little more than Mike would have liked. He's got Justin Wright back. He's got Mitchell Taylor. He's got these veteran guards, and Mike just keeps finding these veteran guards and bringing them through the system. They are extensions of him and of that coaching staff on the floor. And I don't know if anybody's got better point guards in the league than Asheville does. Point guards obviously don't win you a league title, but they certainly don't hurt.
No, they certainly do not. And being able to have experience at the point guard spot, that is massive. UNC Asheville, I think, is a team that's going to be able to ascend, and a man that is always ascending with his great work. That'd be you, Brian. I know that you're hard at work taking a look at this conference preview for Blue Ribbon Yearbook. I know you're doing some great work just taking a look at the Northeast part of the country in general over at Daily Dose of Hoops. And I know you're doing a little bit of work on the college football side of things as well. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. As you mentioned, I am primarily focused on college basketball at 2 places. One at the Blue Ribbon Yearbook, which is still the standard when it comes to, I guess, preseason preview material. It's a fair way to say that. We always encourage people to take a look at that. And as you go into different coaches' offices, you still see that, whether it's the written format or the digital format. We have both available. They are in coaches' offices all over the place. They are the one-stop shop to get everything you need on every Division I basketball team out there. And that'll be available, I believe, in September. So as you're starting to get ready for the season, just look out for the Blue Ribbon Yearbook. Also, Daily Dose of Hoops. We are focused primarily on the Northeastern corridor, on Philadelphia, on New York, on Connecticut, that sort of thing. But we also have a presence down here in the Southeast, and we're continuing to extend. At this point, we have pretty much the entire eastern half of the country covered, but we are, of course, looking to extend our coverage territory. But we appreciate all the interest in Daily Dose of Hoops. Jaden Daly, as you mentioned, is the executive editor there and has been doing this almost as long as I have. This is my 14th season. So he's been, actually probably a little longer, but he's been around and has seen some things, as have I. The landscape is always changing, and we always find a different way to tell a story. So we're always happy to see anybody who comes by and enjoys what we do. We're lifers. I hate to use that word again, but we are definitely lifers in the college basketball landscape.
No question about it. I know that Brian, from when he joined me last year, I was very impressed. And once again, he does such a great job following this great game of college basketball. You mentioned Jaden Daly. He is a guy that just really eats and breathes college basketball as well. These guys do an absolutely tremendous job. And today it was great to be able to get Brian aboard. So big thanks to Brian for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the Big South. Your lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Was great to be joined by Brian Wilmer. He does such an excellent job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball, holding it down over at Daily Dose of Hoops, Blue Ribbon Yearbook, and so much more. Was amazing to get his insights for the second straight year on this Big South Conference preview podcast. So a big thanks to Brian for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the Big South now, because I am doing a conference preview today. That means that any news and notes we saw in college basketball Sunday, those are going to be all summed up on the podcast tomorrow. I know that they're talking expansion in the NCAA tournament. Let's hope and pray that that does not come true, but let's hope and pray that these projections do come true, as we've got ourselves a dead last of my projector or finish, Gardner-Webb. This team was not good last season. They lose each other top 6 scores from last year. Jacob Hudson averaged 4 points per game off the bench, and he's the main guard that returns from a team that was 348th in all of college basketball and turnovers forced on a per possession basis. I recognize that Jeremy Luther has been a part of this program for quite a while and loves it. I just don't know if he's cut out to be a coach. You've got Ace Tolbert, who's going to be coming in from St. Francis, Pennsylvania. He averaged 8.5 points and 2 assists per contest 2 seasons ago. Was limited 5 games last season. How he comes off of injury is anyone's guess. You really don't have a lot of size with regards to this roster as well, and that's when this Gardner-Webb team was always at its best. A few years ago, when the team was able to get things rocking and rolling, it was because they were able to do a nice job on the glass, what have you. They just really don't have any of that size right now. I think it's going to be a big, giant uphill battle for them. You really don't have a lot of shot creators for this team. This is a defense that is poor, to say the least. I think that this program is going to very much be struggling this year. Dead last of my projector finish, going to be going with Gardner-Webb. And number 8, I do go with USC Upstate. Now, I think that things for USC Upstate are actually on the up and up. The fact that you're able to return so many of your minutes from a season ago, with Kamani Gregory being chief among them, 11 points, 3.5 boards, steal per contest, that's solid. Braylon Garcia was able to give you 8.5 points per contest. Lyric Davis was never really able to find his footing at UW Milwaukee along Tennessee State, but that's a guy that I know is a 3-star prospect. You have at the very least a little bit of talent there, so the upside is there with this USC Upstate team. They do have to look to a few guys that were at the non-Division 1 level to be able to develop. You've got Nick Book, who's coming back after he was able to give the team right around 4 boards per contest last year. This was a team that was about 340th in the country with regards to rebound percentage, but Isaiah Skinner has a little bit of size. He's back after giving you about 3.5 or so rebounds per contest, so I do think that things are looking a little bit better for USC Upstate. Still think that's going to be a little bit of a rough, less than savory season for them, but things are looking better. Number 8 in my projector finish, going to be USC Upstate. And number 7, I'm going with Charleston Southern. With Charleston Southern, I do have a few question marks with Son Nimley as a coach for this team, as he obviously loves the program, and I do feel like he brought in some interesting players, and the fact that one of the biggest pickups is not necessarily a pickup, is a guy that returns from injury, Alan Sumler. He last season was out due to injury, but 2 years ago, 14 points points per contest. That's going to be rock solid. You bring in the Bradfords, as you've got Devin Bradford, who was over at Siena last year, 4.5 points, 2.5 boards, a little bit over a block per contest, and then his brother Nick was over at Georgia Southern. He was able to give you about 3.5 points, a little bit less on the rebounding side of things. Deontay Bass, a guy that began his career over at Georgetown, he was a solid player over at Alabama State, 5.5 points, right around 3.5 rebounds per game. You just don't have guys that are going to be absolutely lighting it on fire. This team was 342nd in terms of free throw shooting percentage, despite the fact that they were top 10 in terms of percentage of their possessions that ended in a free throw. So that's a little bit of a concern, the fact that they don't knock down those free throws. They were getting relatively lame-based on the glass, and having Tajay Kelly leave the program, I do think that that's going to be rough for them. So with Charleston Southern, I did end up putting them at number 7 in terms of my projector finish. At number 6, I'm going with UNC Asheville, and for UNC Asheville, they are very much putting their chips in the middle on a man that was out for pretty much the entirety of the season last year, as they've got a nice little bit of a 6-6 combo player that should be able to elevate the offense in Aiden Rubio. He was limited to just 6 games last season, and he's a guy that was able to shoot 40% from three-point range 2 seasons ago over at Central Michigan. DJ Tornado Patrick coming on over from Charleston Southern is big. He had his last full season being in the 2023-24 campaign, was limited to just 3 games last season, 10 points, 4 boards per contest, and that's much of the reason why I put UNC Asheville at number 6. You just don't know what you're going to be able to get out of Rubio along with Patrick coming off of injury. They do bring back Cameron Taylor, a guy that's able to give you 9 points, 4 boards per contest as a freshman last year. Should be able to blossom into a double-figure score. Sage Toatino, he's a 7'1" big man that really didn't give you too much last season, but a little bit of a project guy, and I like the fact that they bring in Mitchell Taylor. He was rock solid for South Carolina State last season, and he was able to average about 8.5 points, 2.5 assists per contest, so he should do a good job. I'll be able to flow the ball, but with this UNC Asheville team, it doesn't matter how good or bad things have been. This has been a program that always has had a tough time playing defense, and I think that that's going to be the case. Once again, David Hermes, he had some size. He comes in after averaging right around about 2 points, 2 boards per contest over at UT San Antonio. Meep for the Roadrunners, and Connor Dubitsky, he's back after shooting about 38% from 3. So the Asheville offense should be pretty solid with their 3-point shooting. I think that they take some strides forward there. Just big time question marks with regards to this defense. So I did land them at number 6 in terms of my projector finish. At number 5, I'm going to be going with Longwood. Longwood is looking to a little bit of a new coaching regime, and they do have a few mix and match guys. They did bring back some guys from a season ago. Elijah Tucker, 9.5 points, and he was able to throw in their 5 rebounds per contest. KJ McClurg, he didn't necessarily live up to expectations last year after being a very good Division II player. He was able to give the team only about 7 points per contest. I think year 2 in the system, they really find their footing, and I really like the fact that they bring in Jacoya Hutchinson. He was over at George Washington last year, not necessarily monstrous numbers, but 6.5 points, 2.5 assists, a starter for them. Emmanuel Richards, he should be able to give you a bit of something down low, 3 rebounds per game, and this is a Longwood team that they're going to be looking a little bit more to be stronger down low. 364th in the country, and opponent's 2-point shooting percentage at 59.8%. Jalen Bernard, he was able to give the team about 3 boards, mid-30s 3-point shooter. He should be able to help out a little bit, and Elijah Jones coming over from Charleston and UW Green Bay is big. He actually shot 53.5% from 3-point range 2 seasons ago over at UW Green Bay, but that said, I do think that with this Longwood team, they are going to be able to develop a little bit more, and I do think that that interior defense is going to be a skoge better. So I've got them in the middle of conference, number 5 in my projector finish. And number 4, it's going to be Presbyterian. Presbyterian tied for their second most wins in the 18-year tenure of the team at the Division I level last year with 14, and now they get Jalen Peterson back after he gave the team a block and a half, 5.5 rebounds per contest. I do think that bringing back so many guys that were a part of that front court from a season ago is big. You've got Iverson King back after he gave the team 5.5 points, 3.5 boards, steal per contest, shot 44% from 3. Presbyterian was a top 70 team with regards to their 3-point shooting percentage, and bringing in something like a Northern Kentucky transfer, Jeremiah Israel, who was able to give you 3.5 points, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range. I think that this offense is going to be able to develop. Carl Parrish being back after he shot darn near 40% from 3, 90% the free throw line. They just provide firepower from the outside that not a lot of teams do have, and I feel like Presbyterian has just been built right, because for Presbyterian, this was a team that was just wandering in the wilderness for the last few seasons. They were really looking to find their footing under Quentin Farrell, who I think is a really good coach. He does not quite on Dustin Kearns' level, but Farrell has done a good job of being able to build up this program. He's done it right, and I do feel like they've got something sustainable now. So with Presbyterian, I do have them at number 4 in terms of my projector finish, and number 3, I'm going to be going with Winthrop. Winthrop. And Winthrop is going to need to be a little bit better at the free throw line. They were outside the top 300 with regards to free throw shooting percentage last year. As a matter of fact, outside the top 320, and Colton Telfer being out after he averaged 15.5 points, 8 boards per contest. That's going to be relatively rough for this team, but I do like the way that they were able to maneuver in the transfer portal line. The fact that you bring in a guy that was so good over at Duquesne 8 seasons ago, and Kareem Rozier, who was able to give you about 3.5 assists, a steal per contest is big. Dallin Berry, he enters the program after he was rock solid over at Charleston Southern himself. 14 points, 5 boards, 2.5 assists, 1.7 steals per contest, and nice stat sheet stuff for Cody Cluett over at San Diego on the West Coast. 9 points per game, 6'5". He's able to pop it from 3-point range in the mid-30s. And Farrell, hopefully I say this correctly, Boyoguino, he was able to give you about 4 boards, mid-30s 3-point shooter. They've got a lot of size, versatility, and then you've got Fielden Hedaway, who comes on over from Loyola Chicago, was glued to the bench, comes on over from South America, a little bit of a project player, and Logan Duncombe. He's a former top 100 recruit, 6'9" big man that used to play at the Power Conference level, if I'm not mistaken, at Indiana and Xavier. He should be able to give you a bit of something down low to sure things up for Winthrop. So even though they don't have Telford in the fold, they should be good down low. They should be a little bit better with regards to their overall shooting. So I do have Winthrop at number 3 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 2, I'm going to be going with Radford. I absolutely love the hire of Mr. Zach Chu. He was a part of that Indiana Pacers management, game strategy, and analytics team. He's going to be looking to a whole bunch of guys to do a rock solid job down low, headlined by Tyson Brown, who comes on over from Georgia Southern. He was able to log for the team 7 boards, a block per contest, and Jalen Johnson, he was very good last year over at Tennessee Tech. 14.5 points, 4 boards, 4.8 assists, 1.6 steals per contest, mid-30s 3-point shooter. Brendan Rigsby is a guy that played at Oregon along with Minnesota. 5.5 points per contest as a part-time starter over at Minnesota last year. He's going to be able to space the floor, and I think that this is going to be a Radford team that's going to be looking to play a little bit faster. I think that they're going to have much more outside shooting than what we've seen from a lot of teams out in the Big South over the last few seasons, because in the Big South, you have quite a few teams that play with quite a bit of tempo, but not a lot of these teams have necessarily been able to give you a good tempo and have necessarily been able to be very efficient on offense. I think the efficiency is going to be there. You're bringing Del Jones. He averaged about 4 points per contest as a freshman over at Clemson last season. A former top 200 recruit, Dennis Parker Jr. He's going to be coming on over from NC State. He was able to give you about 3 points per contest a few seasons ago. I remember 2 years ago, part of that Final Four team, he pulled in there a little bit north of 3 rebounds per game as well. And then Zion Walker is the main guy that returns from last season, shot about 39% from 3-point range. Louis Jordan, he's a guy that stands 6'9". He shot 48% from 3-point range at UMBC last year. I do think that this is going to be a very rock solid Radford team, and I do think that Zach Chu is building it up right, and I do have Radford as a result. At number 2, my projector or finish. Number 1 is High Point. High Point is going to be very much a high point, as they've got so many guys coming into this program. Owen Aquino, he was over at Liberty last season at 6'8", did a bit of everything. 8.5 points, 5.5 boards, 2 steals, a block per contest. Rob Martin was that top scorer over at Southeast Missouri State. He was able to log for the team right around about 15 points, 4.5 assists, a steal per contest. Cameron Fletcher, he was a starter over at Florida State 2 years ago. He was averaging about 11 points, 7.5 rebounds per game. You just don't see that out there in the Big South. Babacar Diallo, he was over at UMKC. He's able to give you right around about 3.5 assists per contest. CSUN's Cuddy Washington, 14.5 points per game. You've got a lot of guys that are able to step up for the team. Vincent Brady, who was over at Missouri State last year, shot 38% from 3, 13.5 points per contest. Now, Flynn Cameron, I think, is going to be very interesting to see what he's going to be able to do. He was the associate coach for High Point. He knows all about this system. High Point, not a team that's necessarily going to run it and gun it. They're just really, really efficient on the offensive end over the last few years, and I feel like this team has done a really good job of just being able to utilize their NIL budget. I think that they're going to be very versatile. Now, they're not going to have someone like a Jocelyn Bodu down low or anything like that. That's going to be a little bit, shall we say, rough for them to be able to replace, but I think that this is still going to be a good team that's going to be very solid along the perimeter. This is a just conference in general that has a bunch of, shall we say, very, very poor defenses, to say the least. So I still think that even though they're going to be very much offensive based, they're still going to have some rock solid defense. You bring back Chase Johnson, who was a nice sharpshooter for the team 8 seasons ago as well, and then Yusef Singore, who was a part of that UConn team, he's going to be coming in as well. You've got a lot of really nice pieces for this High Point team. I've got them number 1 in terms of my projector or finish, and that will wrap things up for the Big South Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And If you do like to hear from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. A big thanks once again to Brian Wilmer. He does great work over at Blue Ribbon Yearbook. He does an amazing job over at Daily Dose of Hoops and so much more. And I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast. So keep in mind, just like past off seasons, every single one of these conferences is going to be getting a special conference preview podcast, much like I did today for the Big South. And I'll be back with you guys once again tomorrow. Thank you.